Welcome to our post-Jubilee Conversation Club and the third instalment of Phil Driver's exposition of things beneficial and accountable. I think today we're going to be steering into language and how we understand and use it within this context, although it's just as applicable in other areas of our technical specialisms. So welcome once again, Phil, from your very early morning shift, 3 o'clock in the morning now, I imagine.
Yep.
So looking forward to a good and you want a challenging conversation today. So we'll try and be combative without being destructive.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Yes, I like people to challenge what I say. Down here, if I create an argument, I argue with myself in the mirror, whereas hopefully with you guys will be able to be a bit more assertive.
Try.
So today, what I wanted to go through was these 4 points: the need for an unambiguous taxonomy and structure for strategies and project management, touch briefly on our PRUB-Logic taxonomy, run through a few questions and reach a few conclusions, and hopefully we'll agree on the conclusions. So every other profession has a precise taxonomy, as I said there, a set of unambiguously defined and widely understood descriptors and an information structure that everybody uses. So in medicine, we know exactly what every single word means, whether it's heart or plasma or lungs or whatever. Same with physics, same with law, same with accounting, and so on. And unfortunately, we don't seem to have that in the strategy and project management professions. Now, you might find that a bit provocative, but watch this space. Once we've got a standard taxonomy and a structure for our information, we know what other practitioners are saying. And there isn't such an unambiguous taxonomy or structure for strategies and project management, as I will now show you. So as I've found in a number of webinars I've run for APM or PMI, there is no consensus on the meaning of those words. So some people think objectives contribute to goals, some people think they're the same, some people think objectives contribute to outcomes, and so on. And there simply is no agreement. Now, any one person, I find, has a very clear idea in their own mind of what each of those words mean. But you put 2 or 3 people together and the consensus breaks down. There is not agreed understanding of those words. The other thing is they're abstract words, and I'm going to emphasize that a number of times. You can interpret those words in many different ways. How they relate to each other is also open to different interpretations. As I said, do goals contribute to objectives or the other way around? They exist in people's minds as qualifiers of physical realities. Now, what I mean by that is if you've got a physical reality, such as a new motorway, somebody might call the motorway their objective. But the objective doesn't exist until you are clear on what the physical reality is, such as the motorway. So objectives, goals, outcomes, they're I'll give you an example here. Let's say you've got a project to build and operate a swimming pool. The goal of the construction commissioning agents is to have a pool. The goal of the builder is to get paid. The goal of the children who use it is to meet friends and socialise. The parents' goal is to have children out of their hair for a few hours. The Ministry of Health wants healthy children. The lifesavers want no one to be hurt. And the coaches want people who can swim safely. Every one of those statements is a goal in the mind of one of the players. So the word goal is hopelessly non-specific and abstract. You can apply it as a label to any one of those things. And are those goals actually objectives or outputs or outcomes or something else? So there's a group in America called StratML, which stands for Strategic Markup Language, and they're trying to put shared meanings on all the strategy words and abstract terms like goals and objectives. And professionals may understand their taxonomy, which goes on for pages and pages, but most people won't get it. It's just too too academic. The definitions for words like outcomes, objectives, and so on are abstract. They're not specific physical actions or consequences. Whereas PRUB-Logic describes physical realities. So we've got this problem. We've got all these words, objectives, goals, outputs, and they're not directly linked to the real world. And in the real physical world, you create assets and enable and motivate people to use them to create benefits. That's what project managers do, and this is what users do to create benefits. This is how the real world operates. But these are ambiguous words. And the contrast is this. With our language, projects, results, uses, and benefits. A project is a physical action. A result is a physical thing. A use is a physical action. A benefit is a physical thing. So PRUB is unambiguously tethered to the real world. It describes the real world. And if you want to bring in words like objectives or goals, you're going to say, hey, this benefit over here is my objective. So you've got to have the benefit first before you can apply the label of objective to that word. So words like goals and objectives are labels. They're choice words. They're almost words that you use to put a priority on it, say, this is what we're going to focus on. But you've got to have the physical reality that you're going to apply that label to. And that's where PRUB comes in. So projects, results, use, and benefits are actual physical realities, whereas goals, objectives, and so on, they're abstract labels for those physical realities. So PRUBs are things. Projects, results, use, and benefits are things. Objectives and goals are just labels of things, abstract labels. So in practice, what we recommend is that you define your strategy using PRUB-Logic. What projects, results, uses, and benefits are you going to do? And then secondly, you can decide if you want to label some of those projects, results, uses, and benefits as goals or objectives. But you have to have the project, result, use, benefit first before you can label them as a goal or an objective. So if we take that a step further, so instead of just project, result, use, benefit, those are 4 words, we then assemble them into a structure that we call a sub-strategy. So we have a set of projects, we have a set of results, uses, and benefits. And our system structures these in a particular way. And this is what I call a standard strategy. And to me, this is something that should be used for every strategy that's developed. And I'll just talk you through that, why I think that is. So in our experience, every strategy has projects relating to information. It has projects relating to regulations, projects relating to resources, projects relating to disseminating resources and information to everybody, and then capital projects. And we found these 5 project categories cover pretty well everything you're going to want to have in a strategy. Our structure enables you to have what we call orphan results. So a whole lot of information here as the first result isn't directly used by end users, but it's used to feed back into refining regulations or defining what resources we need. Similarly, regulations. You need to have regulations, but until they are disseminated in the 4th project to the public, nobody knows about them. So PRUB isn't just simply 4 words, it's also a structure of how those words link together. And these are what we call the links, these arrows. And these links have definite meanings as well. So any evidence of cause and effect sits on the linkages. So the project is in this box, and you then find evidence in the link that will demonstrate that you really will get that result.
Karen's got a hand up. Phil, Karen?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether everybody else is in the same position, but my screen is stuck on your first slide, Phil. We haven't progressed. Are you progressing them?
I am. Is everybody else stuck?
Yeah.
Oh,
I am,
hell.
I think.
Yeah, I'm stuck as well.
Okay, it looks like everybody is. Do you want to maybe unshare and reshare?
Unshare, I'll unshare and reshare.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you,
What's your
Karen.
multitasking, Phil? I was sat there thinking about that.
So open share tray,
Yeah.
screen shared top window.
Given that the picture came up, I would have thought you would have been working.
Window.
Well,
So I share a window, is that right?
well, you can do if you can see it. Yeah.
Or share a Chrome tab, share a meeting. So I share.
You should get a set of images. So we've got your screen now. Do you want to sort of turn your presentation on within PowerPoint?
Okay. Yeah, so that's in PowerPoint. So that's the first slide, and that's the second slide. You're not seeing the second slide.
No, because you're not. It looks as though you haven't turned your presentation on yet. You know, the bottom where the grayed out.
Yeah. Okay.
Presentation button is there. That's moved now.
Ah, is that moving?
Yeah, that moved. Everybody else?
Okay, you'll be getting that. Okay.
Yeah.
So look, I'll
okay.
I think I can. We've been through those. The StratML stuff. So I guess this is the key slide that matters to me, is that objectives and goals, as I said, are abstract words, where project result use benefits are absolutely concrete terms. They're defining physical reality.
Which slide are you on, Phil?
The one with PRUB diagram?
No.
No.
We're on slide 2 at the minute.
What's happening here? So you're on the one headed today's discussion. So go page down, and does that not give you page 3?
No.
Damn.
I've got it now. I've got a standard taxonomy structure. That's gone.
Right, hang on. Open desktop window. Let's just go with this, because you can see that's slide 3, slide 4.
Yeah.
It seems that when I try and display it, slideshow, it's not clicking through for you. I've had this happen once before, and I can't remember what the solution was. Okay.
Phil, I'm just getting the presentation up on my screen. I could maybe try and share it and see if I could advance for you.
Well, you can see these advancing, can't you? But it's just a smaller
I can now,
screen.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, we'll just go for that.
They're in the background just in case. Yeah.
Okay. So this is, for those of you who haven't seen PRUB before, my emphasis is that project results use benefits are physical realities. They're tethered to the real world, whereas objectives and goals are abstract descriptors. They're not physical things until they've been tethered to something like a benefit or a use. So project results are physical. The traditional words are abstract labels. So PRUBs are things, objectives and goals are abstract labels. So what we recommend is people using PRUB sequence define their strategy using PRUB-Logic, and then decide if your project result or use or benefit is a goal or an objective. So you've got to have the PRUBs first before you can start using words like goal and objective. And in our system, not only do we have PRUB, but we have rules for how you set them up into a full, what we call a sub-strategy. So we have a taxonomy and we have an information structure. So and we found that strategies tend to have a standard format. So they have projects up here around information, regulations, resources, dissemination of all of that out to whoever's going to do the work, and then capital works. Our structure demonstrates this concept of an orphan result, where you have a project one produces information that is primarily used or adopted by other projects. Our information structure shows that certain results get used and those uses generate benefits. So these linkages show the flow of information, they show the flow of actions, which you don't get with objectives and goals, which tend to be static labels. Further, these linkages contain evidence. So this is where you put your evidence. Where's your evidence that your information project will produce the information you want? And these dotted ones are even more important. Where's your evidence that these results will actually be used? So PRUB is a logical sequence of words. We have connections called linkages, and we have somewhere to put the evidence. We've actually got a taxonomy that goes much more than that. So I'm not going to explain all of those words. There's far too many of them. But if we just go back to this image, evidence sits on the linkages. So sub-strategy provides you a structure for thinking about where evidence goes. Where do targets go? So targets sit inside each one of these boxes. So if you're wondering where your targets are, they're not just free floating in some documents. Each one of these boxes ideally has targets in it. You'll have a target for the project, and that'll relate to efficiency, and you'll have targets for the results. We've also, if you're looking at topics like efficiency and effectiveness, efficiency applies to projects and users. Effectiveness applies to results and benefits. And I could have quite a long discussion about that if you had more time, but efficiency doesn't relate to results. You can't have an efficient result, but you can have an effective result. You can't have an efficient benefit, you can have an effective benefit. So the structure of information provides a way of having conversations around efficiency and effectiveness. If you're trying to work out, is it worth doing a strategy? The worth is a value placed on the benefits. So you might have an economic value, a cultural value, a social value, an environmental value. So again, the PRUB structure defines where you put concepts like value, where you put concepts like evidence. And as we discussed last time I had a chat with you, accountability can be guided by this structure. So we talked about accountability for projects. Who's accountable for running the project, which is the project manager? But the more challenging question was who was accountable for users? And I think nobody objected to my view that accountability for users is with the procurement or commissioning agent.
I don't think anybody objected, Phil. But I think a lot of us thought, how the hell are we going to get them to do it?
Yes.
Sashi's got his hand up. I don't know whether it's worth just asking if it's pertinent to this particular section. Sashi?
Sorry to interrupt you in mid-flow, Phil. Just there's a lot of competing different models out there, and just picking up on what you were saying in terms of objectives and threats. The Praxis framework and David Dunning's big framework, you know, they do kind of talk first about objectives, targets, and threats, you know, flowing out from strategy and feeding into that strategy developments is things such as imperatives and goals and stuff. So, I mean, in terms of developing the PRUB framework, did you actually at any point like look at these competing different models?
Yes, I did. And I guess I kept coming to this conclusion that words like objectives are words that they're almost a personal choice word. They're a word you could apply to a benefit, you could apply it to a use, you could apply it to a result. So they're not specific enough and they're not tethered to reality. So if you're going to say my objective is that people are healthy, you have to first define people are healthy, which is a benefit. And then you label that as your objective, but it may not be someone else's objective. So I guess I just keep finding that the use of words like objectives and goals and outputs and outcomes just get far too loosely applied as descriptors or labels rather than specifically tethered to the physical world. So yes, I have looked at them, and I guess that's what led us to develop our particular model. And my argument is that our model represents physical reality, whereas the other models represent preferences, in terms of objectives and goals. So they're the preference of the stakeholders, their preferences that they want to put their focus on a particular benefit, and they call that their objective. So taxonomically, I think what we offer is completely different from any of those other models. And I say I'm happy to be challenged on that.
Phil, do you think that some? Sorry, Phil. Do you think? Can I ask this? Do you think sometimes, particularly within the context of projects, that people incorrectly use the word benefit within a project, given that quite often the project is only one step on the way of getting to the benefit?
Yes, I do.
They falsely measure and create and calculate.
Yes, I do. And I've seen the word benefit loosely applied to uses, and I've even seen the word benefit applied to results. Yeah. And I guess that's why I use uppercase PRUB in ours to say, look, it's got to be the benefit to the end user, not some sort of internal benefit. And I've seen the use of phrases like internal benefit and external benefit. As far as I'm concerned, an internal benefit is just a result. It can be extremely beneficial, but please don't use the same word benefit for something in-house as outside the organisation. It's just confusing unless you're a specialist in using that language. And the majority of the sorry, Steve.
Not to stop you in your tracks, but sorry about that. But it's like, I'm looking at the word benefits in the model. And is there a universal one-size-fits-all tag or definition of what a benefit is in your mind, or do benefits need to break down into different categories of benefit? But we're just creeping into that maybe with what you were saying, but maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's 4 categories of benefit, which is the 4 well-beings: economic, cultural, social, environmental.
Right.
So there's definitely those 4 categories, and then you've got to break down into the details of that.
Okay, but they're implicit in your thinking there, are they? Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And a benefit always arises from a use. So a project manager cannot create a benefit. And I take great issue with this concept of benefits realization, where that is seen as something that project managers do. And my argument is they absolutely cannot do it. Only the users create the benefits. And certainly the project manager can produce the right results that the users then say, hey, I love that, I'm going to use it and get a benefit. And I suppose you could.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, again, largely because you've made the scales fall from my eyes, but also because I often think when they say benefit internally within a project or a program, they're actually talking about the degree of accomplishment, what they've achieved within the specification that they've been asked to deliver, which is not the same thing as bringing about a benefit.
Yeah, and I guess I've just seen so many projects that produce absolutely beautiful results that nobody uses. And I can only see that as a white elephant. I do not see that. I don't care how beautiful the building is. If no one's using it, it's not a benefit. It's just an expensive result. And I guess this is where I get really, really pedantic about the use of those words, project, result, use, benefit. And I just find that there's a lack of pedantry in words like goals and objectives. They're just loose, ethereal words until they are attached to a physical thing like a benefit, or attached to a physical thing like a use.
Okay, thank you.
So in our thinking, we've got the 4 words, we've got a systematic way of linking them, so you can follow the flow through a strategy. We've identified areas where accountability has to apply. We've worked out where the evidence sit and where evidence tends to break down, which is between results and uses. And we've got definitions for all of these terms that all fit within that structure. So I guess and a lot of that is actually specified in Appendix 2 of my first book, where I set out to define what should a strategic information system achieve, what should such a system actually do. So that's all described in my first book. So I guess today's questions are these. I've made the claim that there is no unambiguous strategy and project management taxonomy. Maybe Praxis and Dunning would argue otherwise. But I find the existing ones are ambiguous, and they might be crystal clear in the mind of the person that created them. But a lot of the work I do has hundreds of stakeholders involved. Almost none of them are project managers. So they want really, really simple words that mean something to them. So I'm just kicking off a climate change strategy for our county. And that's going to have several hundred stakeholders involved. And if I use words like objectives and goals, everybody just drifts all over the place. But if I pin down what we're going to do on climate change using project results, use benefits, it just sort of, it's like watching concrete set really quickly. It just bang, people get it. So it works. So I guess the question is the current project management and strategy taxonomy and information structure sufficiently good and unambiguous? And has the industry got one, and why not? And do you need one, and why would you need one? And does PRUB-Logic address this need? If not, then what else does? And if it does meet the need, then I've cheekily thrown in there, make it a British standard and make it the standard taxonomy for strategy and project management. So I'd love to hear feedback on any of those questions.
Adrian, with mic on.
Inevitably.
Well
I'm sitting here massively in two minds. I love the idea of our profession being able to tighten itself up a hell of a lot and making itself clearer, especially, Phil, as you said, to, shall we say, the lay person out there, by having unambiguous language. My partner's a retired architect, so a pediment, everybody in architecture knows what a pediment is. It is unambiguous and has been for over 2,000 years. I've got a friend of mine who's a particle physicist, and you name a particle and everyone knows exactly what that particle is. Everyone knows that that name is attached to that particle and what the definition of that particle is, da-di-da-di-da. So it's absolutely unambiguous. So I love the idea of being able to come up with a taxonomy that then gets built in to the profession and has to be built into the profession all around the world at every level. I love that idea. I'm not gonna. I like so much and have contributed tiny bits to Praxis, and I've contributed bits and pieces to just about everything over the last 30 years. I'm not wedded to the taxonomy in anywhere at all. Whether or not your own suggested taxonomy is the right one is actually almost irrelevant. The challenge, what's in my mind, is how on earth do we make it happen? Are the odds so stacked against us? Even if it's in the British standards, I hate to say this, but will it make a difference? Oh God, I'm so torn. I really want this, but I have no idea how to make it happen.
Okay, so I'm encouraged by the fact you think you need such a thing, and I do too. And I guess I've spent 25 years in this space, and my space has been mainly strategy rather than project management. And I've worked with British Telecom in the UK Cabinet Office, and people, because I had a number of years over in the UK, and I just keep coming back to this PRUB as the simplest set of 4 words that everybody understands. And I don't know how to get it widely adopted, other than if someone like Price Waterhouse came along and said, "Hey, we love this," it would become a standard overnight if they started using it, or McKinsey.
I wouldn't bet on it, because I'm kind of thinking, how do we get this to be more like particle physics rather than a religion? And you
Yes.
and it just occurs to me, you can bet your sweet life if PwC get behind PRUB, Accenture would turn around and say, not bloody likely. Our technology is far better, and we go out to religious wars.
That's why standards stand a better chance ultimately, Adrian. But I'll keep my mouth shut for a minute because I've got something else to say. Karen, you have a go.
Right, thank you, Steve. I was going to say I want to flip what Adrian said on his head. I'm torn, but in completely the opposite direction. But I do agree with that last point, and it's a discussion you and I have had, Steve, many times about vested interests. There's far too much of that in our profession. My starting point on this, though, is almost an aversion to a taxonomy, because every project is context dependent. And while I can see what you're getting at, Phil, and I think anything that helps us start improving the way we communicate is a good thing, but I don't subscribe to the view that these things are entirely physical and obviously there's a spectrum here. Clearly something like a bridge, say, is more closely, and viewing that as a result is more close, can be more closely seen as something physical. At the other end of the spectrum, goals and objectives clearly are normally expressed in very subjective terms. So I don't dispute there's a continuum, but it's by no means black and white and can't be. So for example, the example you gave of a building going up, even if it's empty, it might be aesthetically pleasing and have benefit to somebody who wanted their skyline improved, for example. But this idea that we can get to some unambiguous set of words for projects when the context is always different, there is always differences, I think is probably something that isn't. I'd probably like to flip on its head what Adrian was saying there about, I'm sure we could do it, but sort of would it be of any use? I think almost immediately everybody would say, well, my project's different because. So I'm not sure that is but I say if it helps people improve their communication about what they mean by goals and objectives and what is their understanding of this connection between these things, every stakeholder is going to have a different view of that, because we are all people. At the end of the day, projects are done by people for people. So it isn't particle physics in that sense. It's a human endeavour, and as such depends upon our understanding of it. And even something tangible. So for example, your bridge, it could go halfway across the river. Does that make it a bridge, or is that not a bridge? Is it fit for purpose? And again, you have to get into sometimes some things that can be measured. Quite often a lot of these definitions will hinge on how you would measure them, and that seems to be a more useful way of pursuing the idea of benefits. Well, how would we know, is something I always ask students. How would we know if this was true, type thing. So I'm not quite sure how that plays into your argument, but yeah, I just don't think it's as black and white. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now.
Phil, do you think that benefits are something that should be stated or known even before the project starts? And what I'm getting at is when I think I first saw you explain this model several years ago, it's an iterative circular thing, isn't it, where almost you visualize what the benefit is and then work back to figure out how you would demonstrate its use and then its result and what projects would be needed to create that. So you kind of reverse engineer the chain. That may or may not be the case, but that's what I picked up. And I'm thinking also within the context of a project, let's say there's a team sitting there within an organization waiting to be given some work. They often have it lobbed over the fence and they inherit stuff. And I think there's an issue of maybe the benefit doesn't arrive well articulated or well defined. There's no owner behind it, and the project then therefore invents its own benefits because it's told it's got to use some or demonstrate that. And should we perhaps be going, well, back to the originators of the idea, the business case people, the strategists, the people maintaining and managing the portfolio of an organization, and having an expectation that a bundle of words arrived, using this taxonomy to help stabilize and standardize the conversation.
Well, okay, so I think when I first met you, I used to focus on benefits, and then I discovered that an awful lot of projects had the same benefits, but the uses were profoundly different. So somebody living in London and they use the transport system, they get to work in the transport system, they're using a train, whereas if they live in north of Wales, they might be using a horse. So the benefit is they still get to work on time, but the use is completely different. And so we found that identifying the uses first, then the benefits, and then they define the results and the projects. So yeah, definitely uses comes first in our experience. Just going back to Karen's comments, and we gave the example of the empty building. If somebody felt that that was aesthetically beautiful, then that is a benefit. So that would go in the benefits column. So PRUB absolutely can address that issue. So if you're going to build a building, I would like to think that before you built it, you worked out that some people thought aesthetically pleasing was a sufficient benefit to justify building the building. Others felt it had to be occupied, and before you went ahead with the strategy, you would have to look at which of those benefits were your objectives. So you could have a bunch of benefits that you choose not to aim for. You can exclude those and say, no, actually, we're only going to focus on benefits number 1, 4, and 7, and those are our objectives. So, Karen, I disagree with you. I don't think it's a continuous spectrum from PRUB, which is a project describes a physical action, a result is a physical thing, whether it's a computer program or other, whereas objectives and goals are taxonomically different. And I think that's really important. They come about after you've worked out what your project results and uses and benefits are. And they are labels for those things. They're not the thing itself.
I thought you actually just illustrated very well how these terms are tools for communicating about these things. My point was that what somebody aesthetically thinks about something isn't a physical thing. It's very much a subjective thing. But yeah, I like the mechanism and how we might use it to communicate better. But I have doubt, I suppose it's the answer to that first question. There isn't an unambiguous taxonomy, and do we need one? I don't know. I think probably every project does, which is the sort of the examples you're giving are very much project specific. And I agree, that's where you need to have that discussion. And then you can, as you quite rightly said, articulate which ones you will pursue and which ones will be deprioritized. Then everybody knows where they stand much more clearly. So I think we can agree on most of it, Phil. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think I agree with you there, where I've used the word physical reality, and I spent a lot of time trying to work out, is that the word I want there? And I don't think I've got that right yet. And so I agree with you that something that is aesthetic can be a benefit. So is the aesthetics physical? And I had for some stage the real world instead of physical reality, and I haven't quite got that. But I guess the point I'm trying to distinguish between is the thing that you define, which might be something being aesthetically nice, which I would call a benefit. So you define that thing, and then you prioritize it by calling it your objective. So words like goals and objectives, in my mind, are prioritization labels. They're not descriptions of the thing. And I haven't got my language completely right yet, but does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd almost chip in common understanding there.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Maybe not agreement, but understanding.
Yeah, and it's and that's why I said in that first sentence, widely understood.
Yeah.
And I think that's the more important thing. And
or shared. Shared.
Yeah.
Common ground of some sort.
It's got to be common ground, but it's still got to differentiate between the fact that objectives and goals are your priorities. They're not things until they are attached to a thing. So taxonomically, they're simply a different, part of the language.
Yeah.
Okay,
well, it shows you how complicated it is. Shirley Thompson, speak.
Well, if I can find the unmute button. I think this discussion is fascinating because for me, this this relates to the challenge of project management. Project management is a very practical sport, but other people who are not project managers seem to think it's something else. So I totally agree with Phil that we have to pin people down into a practical reality. I don't find it surprising at all that we talk about uses. I thought the IT folks had got that nailed at the front end with requirements over a long time now, and we're talking use cases. So it is getting down to practical. I totally
agree with your software thing about use cases. And when I was first developing this open strategy system, two of my colleagues were open source software guys. And they kept saying to me, Phil, what's the use case? And it irritated the hell out of me because I hadn't actually worked that out at the time. And understanding use cases is an incredibly powerful discipline. And as you say, it's applied in the software industry, but it's not applied in the rest of the strategy profession. And I sort of wonder, well, why not? Because it's such a powerful tool. I agree with you totally.
Well, the thing is, you have to pin people down. And it's extremely difficult to do, and people don't like to be pinned down because they have to work. Yep. They have to think. I think there is an opportunity for explaining to people the advantages of this in the same way the IT folks have done it, but you're not going to sell it by taxonomy, I don't think. I think you're going to have to use the use and use examples of its use. So some of the examples you gave at the beginning, I'd like to hear a lot more about the detail of who's used it and how it worked. You know, if you're talking to hundreds of users, that's really impressive. We need to understand how that works.
Yeah, so I'm using words like taxonomy and standard strategy structure for this discussion forum because I figured you guys could get your head around that.
Yeah.
And that it is, we do have to get that taxonomy right. When we go out to the public, I can't use those words at all. I just use PRUB. And in fact, when I run a workshop, I have a big sticky wall and I have those 4 headings across the top. And I always start by saying, what are you guys trying to do here? You know, what do your, whether it's your customers or your ratepayers, what are they wanting to do in relation to climate change? And they'll say, well, we want to live safely. We don't want to be inundated. So there's the use, we're living safely. So we then look at the benefits of that and then we go back to projects and results. And I find that using those 4 words in a practical workshop, everybody gets it really, really fast. And we build up a sub-strategy very, very easily.
Can I ask, have
you've convinced me of that. It's more getting up at the meta level. How do you sell PRUB to people as a general thing based on PRUB, if you see what I mean, based on usage?
If I knew that answer, I would have been a millionaire years ago. And this has been the challenge, that people don't want to be pinned down. And I'll give an example here. I was running a workshop for a council that was building a flash new swimming pool in a reasonable sized urban centre. And at the moment, there were small swimming pools in some of the outlying towns. And I said to the mayor at this meeting, okay, you're going to build a swimming pool. We've understood all the people are going to use it. Who's going to use the little swimming pools? Are they going to shut down? And he made us change the subject completely because they hadn't even thought about the loss of uses on the other little swimming pools. It just wasn't there.
Is Agile a reaction to being pinned down, though, Phil? Because, you know, one of my fears with being pulled down, and I recognise it, is that often, you know, you can go savagely after somebody and say, I really nailed them down. We've got the specification. We're going to build it, but actually we end up building the wrong thing. Although
I totally get you. And when we use PRUB, it has to constantly evolve. So we can start by saying it looks as if this is the use. Now, are we going to just go ahead and build a project and result that enables that use, or are we going to keep our options open? And are we absolutely sure of that use?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't contradict Agile at all.
No, but I'm just wondering whether the Agile folks will stick their hand up and say, this is why we have Agile. You know, it's kind of, so it allows for that for that lack of knowledge at a particular point to be addressed, perhaps.
I think it does. My experience with Agile, I suppose, because it's in the software industry, they do tend to have use cases and say, we've identified the use case. We think this is the project result we need. Let's knock one up in the workshop and test it and see if it works. So Agile is just PRUB being used iteratively.
Right. So is a use case, and forgive my ignorance, Shirley, is it a sort of scripted thing where there's a sort of process that you sort of walk through, march through, a dialogue that you have in order to establish the use case? And could that therefore be transported into a PRUB, a PRUB conversation as well? Or maybe Phil's even thought of that.
There's lots of different sorts of levels, but some of them would be far too detailed for the kind of big picture use.
I just feel as though, there might actually be something that's got a sort of basic framework set of beats that you go through to, and then the better you got at it, the more inventive. And
I think you'd probably have to, for strategy, you'd have to think of a different language, perhaps. Maybe PRUB has that language.
Well, I'm thinking language. Again, I know within my world, earned value, people ran away from it saying how complicated it was. And then for users like me, I would say, well, it's only about 7 or 8 calculations, for God's sake, and terminology. It's not much of a language to use professionally. And again, what Phil showed us on that list of items for a taxonomy, it's not just the words and their definition, but the fact that they can be shaped into, I don't know, contractual instruments or clauses, or be given context where these words might be used, and there might be some simple rules generated about where and when you might use them. It wouldn't be the world's biggest document, but it would again be just set in concrete so that people could draw upon it for when they were creating their own specific context-oriented documentation. Now, I am sorry, I've got I don't know, Adrian might have gone away. Normally he interrupts after I've left him alone for 5 minutes.
Yeah. I'll say thank you very much.
Yeah, Alan, you got your hand up.
The thing that comes through with this for me, it's a contributor to getting everybody on the same page faster than they otherwise might have been. In the past, I've used something called a quad of aims that I'm sure people have come across, where you get a diverse group of people into a room and try to work out what the objectives, the goal, the vision of the mission. But if you start talking about collectively, what's the purpose, who are the stakeholders, what are the deliverables, what are the measures of performance, you might not get it exactly right, but if you have a go at that and then in your second meeting try to refine it, it gets everybody on the same page. And I see this as being something to help us corral the front end of projects when people are talking about vision and mission and running off in all sorts of directions. I see it as something that'll help contribute to getting everybody on the same page faster. And I think the one thing, just picking up, somebody had talked about pinning down. To me, pinning down is always a bad thing, because the result of pinning down is people running off and doing their own thing anyway. And you don't want them to run off and do their own thing. You want them to run off and do something which is contributing to the shared goal that everybody's bought into.
Well, yeah.
So I guess if I could comment on that, a shared goal is actually relatively rare when you've got 100 stakeholders around the table. What you'll find is that there's a dozen different goals, and that's actually okay. So we then end up with maybe a dozen sub-strategies with subgroups of stakeholders clustering around each sub-strategy. They can all see what every other cluster is doing, and they work in parallel. But as soon as you try and get everybody to agree on a common goal, of common goals is a death to a large-scale community-type project, because common goals don't exist. They exist as subsets of goals for different subgroups.
Yeah, I'm sure there's sequencing that needs to be fitted in there. But at the end of the day, if you don't get the hierarchy of goals aligned and contributing effectively, and you don't do that, if you don't do that quickly, you know, projects end up taking much longer than they otherwise would, and in fact you probably end up with significantly more change as well as a longer implementation time, you know, and more rework.
No, well, not necessarily. I'll give you an example of a river in New Zealand was going to be dammed, and it was a river that the whitewater canoeists loved using. And so, of course, they didn't want the river to be dammed. But they managed to talk about it and say, well, what are the uses? And the canoeists said, we want to use the river for canoeing. And the question was, when do you want to use it? And the answer was once a month. So the dam builder said, well, how about we build the dam, and once a month you tell us how much water you want us to release, so you can have grade 1, 2, 3 or 4 or 5 rapids, and we'll do that for you. So the goals were completely different for those two groups, and both sets of goals were fully satisfied.
Yeah, yeah.
That's dialogue, isn't it?
Yeah, the canoeists had had a better deal than they otherwise would have got.
That's right. And so it came down to understanding the uses. And this is what I've learned over the last 25 years. If you understand what the different subgroups want to do in terms of uses, you find everything else almost falls into place by itself. And so that's the other emphasis I find with open strategies. Focus first on uses. Don't talk about objectives and goals and those other things, because they don't. They leave you with a very fluid conversation that goes all over the place. Whereas if you get people talking about uses, what do you want to do? And then benefits, why do you want to do that particular thing? When do you want to do it? How often? Then you'll find the project results pop out quite clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Adrian, last go.
Yeah, I've switched up because I wanted to give other people, as they raise their hands up, a chance. I thought I'd shut up. First of all, very, very quickly, coming on to the agility thing, one of the things in agility that sits behind agility is an endless focus on value. Why are we doing this? So
yep.
you were absolutely right, Steve, when you said sort of people who are used to working based on agile principles would say that they've actually got this pretty much sorted out. But the reason for it is that behaviorally and behaviorally, agile teams working with agility have it in the backs of their minds. They're always asking the questions, why are we doing this? What are we trying to get out of this? And so not that they're producing working software or whatever the hell they're doing, is it working software that's going to do and deliver the value in whatever terms that's been defined? So that's the first one. Unfortunately, the second point is
sorry, can I just comment on that before you
sure.
go on? Look, I totally agree. And what they are doing is saying, is our software going to be used in such a way that it creates benefit or value for the user? And that's exactly what PRUB does. And Agile is just doing that over and over again very rapidly and refining the result, so you get a refined use and a refined benefit. But so I use the word benefit, and a benefit describes what you're going to get from it. Value is how good was that benefit?
Yeah,
how
no, I completely agree with that. And it's why I quite like the taxonomy. And the second thing really is the challenge of the taxonomy is in some areas we're going to be rubbing up against other professions who perhaps like accounting. So you're doing a business case, and I mean, I'm not an accountant, thank goodness. I'm kind of assuming that they've got it fairly well defined what they mean by things like strategies and benefits and language they use. So if our profession is going to rub up against for taxonomy against other professions who've got long-standing understandings, definitions of terms, and we want to use different ones, that's also a bit of a challenge. And I have no idea how we address that challenge because I have never thought about it.
all I can say is we haven't had a problem with accountants because they tend to focus on the financial benefit and the financial cost of a project. And then we say, well, actually there's social benefits, cultural benefits, environmental benefits, and they struggle to put a dollar value on those things. And so I say to the accountant, it's not up to you to put the value on it, it's up to the user to say how valuable it is to them. And so the accountants do struggle with that, and I think they need to get their heads around the fact that the value of a lot of things is in the mind of the user, and that value is real. And if we just stick with the accounting value, then the financial value, that doesn't give you the answers that you need. So yes, look, I agree with you that there is a rubbing up against other professions.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I'm with you there, because especially in public sector, they're quite used to dealing with both financial and non-financial benefits.
Okay.
And they're very good at defining even with measures, even if those measures are indirect.
Okay, fine. Yeah, look, I take your point on that. I think some areas are getting very good at doing that. Yep.
Did you have a second point, Adrian? Or was that it?
I think no, that was it. The second point was the other professions,
right? Okay,
and just sort of raising that as a challenge. I still personally love the idea. Haven't a clue how we make it happen.
Okay, we're going to have to wind things up, obviously in anticipation of yet another follow on at some point in the nearish future. Karen Thompson, question for you.
Yes, Dave.
Do you think that PRUB has a utility within the framework of RPM, Responsible Project Management?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's in terms of helping us to communicate about these things, and indeed the way Phil described a sort of an early project workshop where you actually unpack some of these things. But I think it needs to be done at the level of each project and get that, even if it's not, people don't agree, at least they'll understand what somebody else means by something. And as you say, it then becomes a tool for prioritizing what you include and what you don't include. I
wonder whether we should start, saying if PRUB-Logic is the answer, what we're going to do about it. Well, one of the things might be to, I don't know, to maybe, again, forgive me if I'm using the wrong language here, but is there some justification in attempting a white paper based around the taxonomy? But I also would like to see it within the context of the notion of use case that Shirley introduced, and also maybe roping in somebody from the financial community. Are you talking about financial accounting or cost accounting? Would it be somebody from SEMA or somebody from ICA, Adrian, do you think? What kind of background would there be? Or is it investment? If Adrian's there.
Investment would certainly correlate with strategy.
So I'm back now. I'm not sure. I'd have to give that some thought. Sorry.
Okay. And Karen, what weren't you sure about?
Well, I wasn't sure why you would only pick out accountancy. I mean, the point is we need to start understanding how we can measure some of these things, whether it's environmental impact, social value, and so forth. Yeah.
I do, however, hold to some of the stuff that Phil's been talking about really making clear in a document when certain terms should be used and how they apply within the PRUB framework, and moving it so that it can either be formalised within a standard, perhaps, or as part of a standard, or could be the subject of a standard in and of itself. Not sure. But
I think the powerful thing might be to do that, but then alongside it, to reflect specific contexts, have some some examples from different contexts.
Yeah, which plays to Shirley's request. That we, what's the pitch?
It's even more fun and games when you come into a lot of change programs these days are at least in part and about modifying the organization culture, and given that there are at least 5 basic organization culture models that I'm aware of, let alone myriad variations on those. How we actually define what shall we say, an old organization culture taxonomy for use in projects. Oh, that's fun. Do we go with Shine? Do we go with whoever the hell else? Or I personally use a combination of two models.
I guess from my experience, if we look at a manufacturing company who's making stuff and selling it, their focus is absolutely on the uses. That is their starting point. And I feel the public sector has lost that focus that is absolutely black and white in the private sector, because if they don't satisfy the uses, they're out of business. That's how bold it is. And that's where I think we need to bring that use focus, use and benefit focus into project management and strategy unambiguously.
A bit unfair. I mean, across over a dozen sectors in both commercial and public realm, I've seen organization culture as, for example, as being as much a part of major change programs as we want to reduce our costs and in the organization through this massive reorganization, and they're just as good at defining, or just as bad at defining what they mean by that as they are about trying to define properly how they're going to take cost effectively out of the business without wrecking their business. Because any fool can cut costs. It takes cleverness to cut costs without wrecking the business.
Sure. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yep. No, I do make a couple of sweeping statements every now and again, so I'll take your point.
Hey, I was accused of doing that on LinkedIn last week, and I'd stuck my hands up and say, "Yeah, dead right."
Yeah.
Right.
And I guess this has been the challenge for me over the years, is bit by bit, year by year, we introduce another word into our taxonomy, and then people rip it apart, and then we slightly tweak that word. And for initial few years with our company Open Strategies, we had a byline of managing collective wisdom, until somebody said to me, no, managing is the wrong word. It's totally counter to your whole philosophy. And liberating collective wisdom was the word that just became an absolute aha moment for us. And what I'm trying to do here, using words like physical reality and so on, I'm not sure I've got the right words on that one. I'm sure that PRUB are the right words. So constant refinement by you guys challenging me is really helpful. So I appreciate that.
I think there is space certainly for a short document to be an article or something stating these objectives. So I think there's room for that or that would be a positive next step for them to be dropped gently into a couple of inboxes of some of the departments that aren't actually grappling or have yet to come to grips with benefit as a concept, although they are, they have some kind of responsibility for dealing with it.
Right.
Okay. Right. I'm sure we'll have a few offline conversations after this amongst ourselves. But given that we were working towards a taxonomy, I'd be, I wouldn't turn it away from a proposal coming into somewhere like the BSI. Okay, right. So I will conclude now by saying that this discussion will continue, and this dialogue and pushing for, I suppose, raising the profile of use before benefit as a perhaps a change in emphasis is required, and we can help with that, I think. I will once again thank Phil for dragging himself out of bed at an ungodly hour to talk to us. Fascinating discussion again, and look forward to the opportunity next time. Well, that's probably going to be in the autumn, I think now. Okay, so thanks again, Phil. We'll be sharing the slides along with the recording of the broadcast shortly. Look ahead briefly to next week, which again is kind of interesting. It's Greg Lawton from a company called Nodes and Links, very fashionable at the moment, deeply into our data analytics. I've challenged him to ask us to come along and discuss the and consider the beneficial impact of all of this data analytics and how it's going to serve the planet and its future as well. So Greg Lawton, Nodes and Links. He'll be in conversation with Jonathan Crone as well. Jonathan Crone was the former program director of the Terminal 5 for Heathrow. I think is one of his major achievements, and he'll be interviewing Greg along with me chipping in. So look forward to that next week. Again, have a very safe week, unless you're the Prime Minister. So see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Phil.
Cheers. Okay, bye.
Really good.